Alright, I'm back with another Cyberpunk 2077 video, which is not something I thought I would be saying in September of 2022, but it has been an interesting week, to say the least. Things appear to be winding down. The peaks, player counts, and peak sales chart things are starting to go down, which is understandable. It's been a week since all this craziness started, and it is a single-player game, so I'm expecting some level of trail off, but I kind of just wanted to go through the kind of insanity of what happened over the course of the past week, what I make of it, what I've been doing with the game, stuff like that, and where things may be headed in the future. So, to recap briefly, all of this kicked off with the arrival of Cyberpunk Edgerunners, a new anime series from Trigger, which has been airing on Netflix as of last weekend. It looked really cool in all the trailers, and Trigger animation is always neat, but what I think most people were not expecting was such a compelling story and set of characters, and these were like CDPR people who originally wrote this anime, and it has been in the works for years, like well before all of the original, Cyberpunk 2077 game drama played out. So they were, working on this forever. There was no information about it for years, and then they're like, oh yeah, we are still making this, and then it actually launched. I don't know, among my circle, I know a ton of people have been watching it, but it has not exactly been like topping Netflix charts like Arcane. It was on the top 10 list like I think a day or two after it launched, but it has not really stayed there. So it is kind of a niche show, and yet everyone in the gaming community seems to be finding it, seeking it out, and watching it on the recommendation of their friends and I guess people like me. But what's the biggest takeaway here is this is a transmedia success story that I don't think we've really ever seen before. And transmedia is essentially when you're taking your franchise and then operating it across all different kinds of media. If you're one of my Destiny viewers, you know that Bungie has a transmedia strategy, upcoming for Destiny, where they haven't really started it yet, but they're going to be doing that in the future in some capacity. That can be comic books, that can be novels, that can be TV shows, that can be animes, that can be movies, all that kind of stuff. And the point is, in a perfect world, you want this to synergize. So you want, the game to drive people to the TV show, or you want the TV show to drive people to the game. It's hard to kind of measure this ever happening in practice. I know when The Witcher came out on Netflix and was really good, that did result in a surge of sales for The Witcher 3. I don't have any data on whether Arcane being really good increased interest in League of Legends, which is already a massive game. Nor do I have the counterexample of a bad video game show like Resident Evil or like Halo, I guess, decreasing affinity for those series. I would argue that the Halo show on Paramount decreased my affinity for that series because I don't know who greenlight some of the decisions that were made in there, and that makes me question their judgment about Halo overall. But what happened with Arcane was a very, very clear example of people being driven from the game and seeing that version of Night City and heading over to, or being driven from the series and being driven to the game. Seeing how kind of interesting Night City was, seeing if, you can have these powers that you saw in the show, like they were using, all the UI and the sound effects from the series. I saw the series creator say that he didn't really think it was an adaptation necessarily, that it was more, there's not really even a word for it, because he wasn't adapting a literal story from the game. He was creating a new story set in the same city. And it really does kind of change the dynamics of Cyberpunk 2077 itself, because without getting into spoilers, like, you will really, really hate a specific character even more after watching the show. You will kind of have new context for how powerful you become as V with all your cyberware. The risks of jacking yourself up with too much cyberware is something that's clearly in the show. So what this did is, between this and there was an Edgerunners patch, which it wasn't the biggest patch. It added a couple very short missions. It added transmog to the game finally, and it added a very tiny crossover quest for Edgerunners, where there's a couple guns from the show. There's the main guy's jacket, but it wasn't like a huge crossover, and there certainly have been bigger patches in the past. There was also a 50% off sale for the game. I think it was across all platforms, so that is obviously a sales driver too. This ended in a wild situation where Cyberpunk this over the course of the past week, the concurrent player count on Steam, which is the only one we can really track, just kept going up and up and up. And CDPR said that over 1 million players a day were playing Cyberpunk, which is crazy for a single player game that has been out for 2 years, that is not even releasing anything like a major expansion. It was just this surge of interest from edge runners combined with the sale. And ultimately, I think the final peak on Steam that I don't think we're going to top, we'll see, but was 136,000 concurrent players. It was putting it well inside the top 10 list. And for a brief period yesterday, Cyberpunk was the number one selling game on Steam. Again, almost 2 years after launch, which is crazy. And one unmentioned thing through all of this is that CDPR has spent the last 2 years fixing the game and adding to it. Mostly fixing, somewhat adding to it, but a lot of almost all of the major technical issues from launch have been solved. Not everything, obviously, as this is still a giant open world video game and you're going to run into bugs somewhere. But this is kind of a new narrative of should we forgive CDPR? Are we, sweeping the history of how bad this game was under the rug? I think for me, it's kind of easy to split it in my mind. And I remain kind of upset at CDPR corporate for this entire saga. The management who made all of these decisions. They literally lied about how the game was performing on last-gen consoles. They said it was performing surprisingly well when it could barely even run on base PS4s and Xboxes, and they should have known that. I don't think they did a very good job apologizing at all for the state the game launched in. And then they made reviewers look bad because they gave all the reviewers PC codes, and PC was far and away the best place to run the game. It wasn't perfect by any means, but you were not running into these enormous technical challenges. So when the game was getting, 8s, 9s, and 10s at launch, which CDPR cited, everyone was like, what the hell? You paid off reviewers. It's no, they just gave us the best copy of the game, and we had no idea that the console versions were worse. And the overall thing that happened here is they released this game, probably a year and a half early. And it had already been delayed at that point, but management made the decision that no, they were not going to delay it anymore. That would hurt their bottom line. So they were going to release it. Clearly, they should not have released it in the state it was in. It was badly broken. It was poorly optimized. It was missing features. And they have spent, literally the last 2 years trying to fix it. And if the game launched in the state it was in today, it would not have, maybe everything that was promised, and some things cannot be, patched in, but it is a much, much different experience now than it would have been then. And it didn't even work out for the executives. They sold 17 million copies so far, or whatever. That's the last number we know. They sold 12 million copies in 3 weeks, which is insane. Or 13.9, it was something like that. But CDPR has lost something like 80% of its stock value since Cyberpunk came out. So they very much paid the price for this, so to speak. They hopefully have learned their lesson. I don't know if any of the top people were ended up being pushed out of the company. I don't think they did. I think most of them are still there. But the way I view this is this is more of a celebration of the developers. And I've heard some kind of, a lot of really heartfelt messages from the developers that, they're so happy to see this resurgence. And one who's an ex-CDPR employee now was talking about how bad, how horrible and ashamed everybody felt at launch because they had worked so hard on this and they released it and it just wasn't ready and it was bad and everyone was mocking it. And now this is some sort of vindication to see this kind of second life for the game. And again, it is certainly far from a perfect game, and there are still, many issues with it. They're never going to patch in, the life paths never meant anything. The romance options are too restrictive. The police AI is still something they have not fixed, and there's allegedly going to address that in a later patch. I liked most of the sub-storylines better than the main Johnny storyline. There's no vehicle combat at all. There's no flying cars. There's no aircraft. There's just many, many things that the game is missing compared to its open world rivals like your GTA type games. And yet, I've always maintained that what is in there can make for a very fun, very solid experience. And I'm not going to go through everything I've loved about the game over the years, but I think it has created some of the most memorable NPCs in recent memory. I think the whole intro with Jackie is 10 out of 10. It's so good. And then NPCs like Judy, Panam, I think are some of the best written characters, best voice acted we've seen in years. I think combat is really fun. I think they have a really cool, diverse array of builds. They have patched in the difficulty to make the game less of a cakewalk. Now it's still pretty easy, but it is very fun to play. And then just Night City as a world, I think, is a very it's a gorgeous place, especially playing on PC or playing in the next gen console versions now. It is very gorgeous. They've done some kind of unexpected things. Like I saw they patched in city dust storms, which didn't used to be a thing, and it really is, a fantastic place that you want to spend time in. The world is a little empty, but I think that has improved over time. In terms of like kind of what I've been doing with this whole renaissance, as I have tried to put my money where my mouth is, and I have returned to the game kind of in earnest. I've been taking a little bit of a Destiny break to do so, and so I have Cyberpunk enthusiast that I am. I've had three Vs. I have 3 playthroughs. My first one was on Xbox One X, Xbox Series X, but it was playing the One X version, and that was the one. It was my melee build. I did a full 100% clear, literally everything possible you could do. So literally the only thing I could even do going back to that game was playing like the 3 new gigs, and there was nothing else to do. My second one was on PC. That is my Quick Hack V, and with her, I had put already, 35, 40 hours into the game. I'd done essentially everything except the final quest and just a few of the more annoying final side quests, like the Delamain quest and the Beat on the Brat stuff. Like I just kind of left that blank. And there were a few I also skipped that are still good, like Cinderman and stuff. So I went back to play with that V and did a little bit there. And then I have my third V, which I have all these because you can do all these different kind of builds and playthroughs and make different decisions to a certain extent. And that is my Assault variant V, where she is just guns blazing and going down the annihilation trees and stuff like that. I just gave her gorilla arms in a recent upgrade. I had only taken her to level 19 out of 50, so I had saved most of the game. And the reason I put her down and wasn't using her was I wanted to pick her back up again once the game was like fully fixed, once it had been patched enough. And 2 years later, we are finally at that point, and so I'm getting to kind of experience, maybe not even fully new player experience of Cyberpunk, but instead something with all of the fixes on board here. And I'm having a really good time with it, and the goal is to beat it with all these characters to be ready for the DLC coming in 2023, Phantom Liberty. One open question is what happens from here, as in what will CDPR do after all of this, these huge, new sales and these new player counts? Will they change anything? I don't know, and I'm leaning toward them not really altering their plans too much, because like you have to plan this stuff way ahead of time. Like if you say you want to greenlight a second DLC now, how long are you working that ahead of time? Like that's going to be at least another year and a half away, and they already have one big DLC, so they might think that is kind of enough, and then the other stuff that they were already planning to patch in. And I still think their plan is probably to move on to the next Witcher game, which they have already established as their next thing. But also, if they are going to change anything, maybe move up the Cyberpunk sequel that I always thought they were going to make, and make sure they are doing what they've said before is going to be a parallel development track for that. So developing both Witcher and Cyberpunk at the same time, even though Witcher will probably make it out first. I just don't know how much more you really add or how much you build on 2077. Obviously, CDPR is going through a big change to Unreal Engine 5 instead of the Red Engine, and I think they're probably excited to get started on that. And I just don't know how many years they want to put into Cyberpunk 2077, even with the recent surge here. I think they're already doing a significant thing in the form of the DLC. I just don't know if this is going to be enough to greenlight a second enormous DLC or something they canceled, like the multiplayer like spin-off game they were planning. As much as I would like to see all of those, I do think maybe it's better to just kind of regroup and then do all of this stuff in a sequel and not screw up the sequel and have a good launch of the sequel. So we'll see what happens, but I know my coverage, I think, has gotten, at least a handful of my readers into playing the game or picking it up or going back to it or something, and I hope you're having a good time. I don't know if I'll get all the way through my playthrough on my my third V here. We'll see if I run out of steam, but it's been a really wild week. What one I've rarely ever seen in the industry like this. Like it's just there are games that make comebacks, and the No Man's Sky is always the example. But like this was such a strange, pointed moment based on an anime series specifically as the main driver as to why this is happening. And then people got to discover the 2 years of changes that have been made to this game. So just a wild story all around, and it's been pretty cool to see. So anyway, that's my kind of recap and analysis and take on it. So I can't promise I won't do, maybe another Cyberpunk video or two if I keep playing, but probably back to Destiny for a bit. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later. Take care.